This is really a life's journey, and I did begin actually in the sciences. I was a graduate in mathematics and physics and became a maths teacher, science teacher at first, and kind of soon tired of that, found that it wasn't that stimulating, and got involved in the pursuit of spirituality for a long time, starting in the early 1980s, reading and practicing various types of Indian spiritual traditions and doing a lot of work in understanding, absorbing the vast knowledge that the Vedic cultures have for us. And while I wouldn't say that I'm a practitioner of any one Vedic tradition or would consider myself a Hindu, it's still a tradition that I cherish because it does have so many profound truths in it. Then, of course, I got involved in the political scene in the late 1980s, and as Angelica said, I went through a conventional trajectory in politics, ended up getting university positions and teaching and getting involved in various international conflicts. And then I was exposed to the Disclosure Project. So what that meant was that I then became fascinated by this whole ET issue and how that related to international politics. So in a way, the topic that I have for today really represents the journey that I've taken. The science, spirituality and politics is a journey that I've taken, and it's taken me to this point where it all hinges on understanding extraterrestrial civilizations. So what I'm going to do is really try to give you an overview of a lot of information in a 90-minute, 80-minute segment, depending on how ruthlessly the timekeepers enforce their 10-minute signals. So I'm going to try to get through quite a bit of material and hopefully integrate a lot of what we've been exposed to during this series of presentations over the last 3 days. So firstly, I'm going to look at, well, how do we understand extraterrestrial civilizations? You know, what are they like, right? You know, that's considered a typology. So how do we build a typology of extraterrestrial civilizations? Well, one way is to look at the way in which they are physiologically constructed. As you see with that very first slide, I mean, we've got all these different body types. So one way is to just look at that. One source for doing precisely that is Command Sergeant Major Robert Dean. He saw a top secret classified document, the 1964 NATO document, The Assessment, that described 4 different extraterrestrial civilizations visiting the Earth. So this was a cosmic top secret classification that applies to NATO documents. In 1964, he was in the supreme headquarters of the Allied powers in Europe. He was the duty roster for the officers in the operations centre at NATO. So they gave him some privileges, and one of those was to look at some top secret NATO documents that were hidden in the vault. It was only when he was in the Supreme Headquarters Operating Centre that he was able to have access, but he was able to read this document over a period of a year and absorb a lot of what it was saying. What he said it described was 4 different extraterrestrial civilizations visiting our world known to the NATO powers in 1964. So this is what they know, I mean, rather than things that they are speculating about or the many more that might be out there. But these are the ones that they knew with certainty are visiting our world. The first are a human-looking species of extraterrestrials. Another one is the grey, which I'm sure you all know about or have heard about. It's always in a lot of the literature. Then you have what is called a tall white, which seems to be a kind of hybrid between these two. The tall whites is a kind of hybrid being, or the tall greys, as they're sometimes called. And then you have, of course, the reptilians. So those are 4 different extraterrestrial civilizations that were described by Robert Dean that was in this top secret NATO assessment. However, that's based on physiology. It's how they look. Another way of describing extraterrestrial civilizations is looking at the way they consume energy. And this was something that was pioneered by a Soviet astronomer, Dr. Nikolai Kardashev, who in 1964 published a paper on classifying extraterrestrial civilizations on the basis of their energy consumption. So he argued that ETs evolved based on the ability to use energy at different macroscopic levels. The first type was one, and that was using energy at a planetary level. The second type was two, using energy at a stellar level, stars. And the third type, using energy at a galactic level. His typology was popularized by this person, Michio Kaku, at Columbia University. And Kaku basically introduced another category that was implicit in what Kardashev had to say, but Kaku made it explicit, and that is type 0 civilizations. That is a civilization which has not yet reached that level of using energy at a planetary level and still uses energy at a more limited kind of subplanetary level. And I'll clarify that as I go along. So with the type 0 civilizations, just to give you a little bit of a rundown on what they are like, energy consumption is based on fossil fuels, bioenergy, and other limited sources found on the planet. For example, uranium and coal. We all know about these limited sources. Power cars or generators, reactors. There's a need by type 0 civilizations to acquire and control various non-renewable and biological resources on a planet. It's very important for a type 0 civilization. It's what powers their industries, their commerce, their infrastructure. They need to have these limited fuels, fossil fuels, to be able to just conduct daily life and the kind of projects that are essential for any civilization. Earth is an example clearly of a type 0 civilization. It uses fossil fuels, bioenergy and non-renewable resources such as uranium for energy and many other limited resources. However, it's something that isn't just unique to our current civilization. It's something that we can see actually existed in earlier civilizations in antiquity. We get a lot of evidence for this in some of the hieroglyphics found in various temples around the world, and one of the most famous is the Temple of Abydos hieroglyphics, which depict rocket-propelled vehicles operating in ancient Egypt. It was in the Temple of Abydos, this hieroglyphic. It's thousands of years old, and it shows what clearly looks like a helicopter. Here you have advanced jet planes, or some kind of subspace vehicle. And here it's either a submarine or some other object that, like an elliptical or a cigar-shaped ship that often is seen by many observing UFOs. So these are clearly using a form of propulsion that we would be very familiar with. You know, looking at the tailwinds. I mean, that's kind of like at the tail there, and there. That's suggesting it's using aerodynamic principles in terms of being able to propel itself through the air. So it's similar to the technology that is used in modern aircraft. According to Zecharia Sitchin, the Anunnaki used rocket vehicles and spaceports in the ancient Near East. So this is something that Sitchin, a very well-known Sumerian scholar that has been referred to a number of times during this conference, described. And so this is one of the cuneiform texts, and of course that's a space shuttle launching off from Cape Canaveral. And obviously with that kind of thrust that's being generated there, you would have a need for a very stable platform for this to occur. Otherwise, the stability of the shuttle or the rocket ship would be affected if you didn't have a stable platform. So is there evidence of stable platforms that could have been used for spaceports in the ancient world? Well, yes, there is. According to Greek legend, the site of Baalbek was actually used by Helios, the sun god, to launch his chariots and to land his chariots in the ancient world. And Baalbek is distinguished by this series of massive stones, platforms, 300-ton stones, and there's also a few called the Trilithon, which are as much as 800 tons. And on top of these, that's the Trilithon, and these are the 300-ton stones at Baalbek. On top of this ancient platform was constructed a massive temple by the Romans, the Temple of Jupiter. And of course this is a depiction of Helios on his sun chariot. So that's suggesting that what we have in ancient Baalbek is an ancient platform, space platform, used for launching rockets, similar to Cape Canaveral. There's ancient evidence that suggests that visiting Type 0 civilizations were revered as gods who provided humanity with technology to build civilizations. So, for example, you have one cuneiform text here with Shames, the sun god, and here you have humans. So you can see this is a being that is very, very tall. Estimates of 20 feet or something is not unknown for these beings. According to Zecharia Sitchin, humans were genetically created by the Anunnaki to mine gold. The Anunnaki had a need for one of our limited resources, a dire need for that resource, and for their home world, which apparently had a need for that. And here you have a description of the different planets, the 9 planets. Well, I guess Pluto's been relegated, poor thing. Now we have the 10th planet, Planet X, and I guess NASA does things to confuse us, because officially now we would call it the 9th planet, wouldn't we? But anyway, the Anunnaki is supposed to be resident on this 10th planet, Nibiru as it's called, and which comes on a long elliptical orbit through the plane of our solar system every 3,600 years. There's a lot of evidence that these ancient Type 0 civilizations were quite warlike, that they fought each other regularly. So that is something that is substantiated by a lot of the evidence that Sitchin was able to uncover in some of his works, the Wars of Gods and Men. And nuclear weapons were used and destroyed whole regions. For example, in the Mahabharata, and Michael Cremo is the expert on that field in terms of the ancient archaeological evidence, that there is evidence that atomic weapons were used in the various areas of India, ancient India. And this was something that, according to Sitchin, and we find references in various Vedic texts, was due to the fighting between the gods, or extraterrestrials as we would refer them. In other words, this was not humans fighting against each other, it was the gods using human proxies in their fights against one another. So it kind of gives you a different picture of what was actually being described by Homer when he was talking about the Battle of Troy, where you had the gods, being on different sides of the war there. Rather than being myth, it actually may have been exactly what happened. There's modern evidence of Type 0 extraterrestrial civilizations visiting Earth who are involved in resource extraction and competitive conflict. So this is not new. This has been going on for thousands of years. And we have modern evidence of this. The abductions and cattle mutilations involving grey and reptilian ETs. Genetics are often extracted for a variety of purposes, including building hybrid beings. Many of the individuals who have been experiencers and been abducted have described extraterrestrials, such as the greys, and even the reptilians in a smaller number of cases, performing very invasive medical procedures and being involved in various genetic experiments. Water is also something that is needed by these different extraterrestrial civilizations that are, or some of them that are visiting us. Water seems to be extracted in significant quantities and used for various purposes. Another a whistleblower, Paola Harris, mentioned him during her presentation this morning. He described the tall whites, and they had agreed to resource and technology exchanges with the US military in the 1950s. And that continues to the present day as far as we know. And the tall whites require various metals such as aluminium, titanium and food. Clearly this is the kind of material or limited resources that a Type 0 civilization would be requiring. And so the tall whites appear to fall into that category. Some of the things we can tell about civilizations or extraterrestrial civilizations that are visiting us is that they use anti-gravity technology to travel, which somehow suspends the laws of inertia. The laws of inertia don't operate, and many sightings of UFOs involve these objects accelerating with hundreds of g-forces where the laws of inertia don't seem to apply. In other words, they make right-angle turns, travelling at 5 times the speed of light, which ordinarily would mean that everything within that vehicle would be crushed as it kind of slammed into the wall, heading in the direction that it originally was. That's the law of inertia. But of course, there's some technology which suspends that inertia in those craft so that they can make these startling right-angle turns where hundreds of g-forces are experienced. Many extraterrestrial vehicles exhibit electromagnetic field, which is evidence of the Byfield-Brown effect. In other words, many contactees, many taking photographs of these UFOs, describe them as being luminous. Byfield-Brown, Thomas Townsend Brown was the person who was the pioneer back in the 1920s, believe it or not, that long ago, showing that there was a clear relationship between electromagnetism and gravity. And he had a patent on that and continued to conduct a lot of work in that area. What he found was that capacitors holding large electrostatic charges exhibit an anti-gravity effect. So in other words, 30,000 volts, if you have a capacitor which has 2 electrodes on it and there's a 30,000 volt electrostatic charge at one end, say the anode, the positive end, then you will see a lift, that this object will lift. And that is actually being reproduced in schools. A lot of high schools now can do this, they can replicate this. And it's called the Byfield-Brown effect simply because the scientific community hasn't deemed it as being in any way significant in terms of a new law of physics. There's a lot going on there as to why that's happened. But nevertheless, this seems to be exactly the principle under which these UFOs or flying saucers operate. In 1988, an incident occurred at Norton Air Force Base where a whistleblower talked about what he saw in there, and he saw a vehicle, a flying saucer, actually being able to display the anti-gravity effect that was just hovering in this hangar where that was classified, so it was off limits to others that were involved in a high-tech air show. And so he was able to see this object, and it had a lot of capacitors there, and it was evidence that the US Air Force had anti-gravity technology in these alien reproduction vehicles, as they're commonly called, because it's based on the reverse engineering of alien or extraterrestrial technologies. So this is technology that is available, and it's based on what has been retrieved or exchanged with extraterrestrials. Anti-gravity technology can be powered by nuclear energy or classified elements like element 115. Bob Lazar, a famous whistleblower, he talked about this element 115 because basically you need something to generate a large electromagnetic field, generate or power extraordinary electrostatic charges so that you can generate the kind of Byfield-Brown effect that would explain how these vehicles are able to propel themselves. And so it appears, based on what Bob Lazar has said, that some of these vehicles use elements or limited resources like element 115. Also, nuclear energy is used. Charles Hall described how nuclear energy was used by the vehicles that were built by the US Air Force in collaboration with the Tall Whites. So that again is showing that the technology being used there is based on the consumption of limited resources. Agreements with extraterrestrials, I've done quite a bit of research on this and found that there's a lot to substantiate the thesis that President Eisenhower did meet with different extraterrestrial representatives in negotiations over technology exchanges back in the 1950s. Some whistleblowers refer to the unfair agreements with ETs due to extensive basing rights and abductions. It seems that those that were familiar with these agreements, whatever they were, it's never clear exactly what was involved, but those that have come forward to disclose a little bit about them have said that there was some unhappiness about it. For example, Colonel Corso in the day after Roswell said, quote, "We had negotiated a kind of surrender with them. ETs. As long as we couldn't fight them, they dictated the terms because they knew what we most feared was disclosure, end quote. So that is a sign of his displeasure over what he felt were these unfair agreements that existed. He referred to those later, especially in his unpublished manuscript, Dawn of a New Age. So the Type 0 civilizations are interested in resource acquisition, are very competitive, and are clever negotiators. These are some of the conclusions we can draw by looking at all of this evidence. They can promote crisis situations to meet resource acquisition goals. So, for example, you have Nancy Leiter and the Zetas and Planet X. I mean, that is a very well-known website that made this famous prediction back in 2003 that there would be a pole shift that would basically lead to 95% of humanity being devastated. And there's kind of variations on that, but what I see here is that there is this tendency to manipulate human uncertainty over what lies ahead, and that would meet the resource acquisition goals of some of the extraterrestrial groups that are behind that. And Nancy Leiter says openly that she is involved with the Zetas. So the Zetas are responsible for putting out this fear-based message that we are going to have a pole shift soon, and 95% of the population are going to be wiped out, and the 5% who get taken off planet on the right ships will then be brought back and repopulate, that sort of thing. But I think I'll talk a little bit more about that later as to how reliable that kind of information is. They use human genetics to engineer hybrids to enhance species as workers. That's the message that Zecharia Sitchin has conveyed through his study of the Sumerian cuneiform texts. They need gold and other scarce metals used for protecting the environment, life enhancement, psychic abilities, and monatomic gold. I think that the Anunnaki worked that out a long time ago. Put monatomic gold in your atmosphere and you live hundreds of years longer, your body experiences much more healthy conditions, and your psychic abilities are enhanced. Whereas what does our government put up there in the atmosphere? I mean, chemtrails, that's not something to enhance our abilities, it's designed to dumb us down. But some ETs have worked that out, and that's why I believe the Anunnaki were after the gold and other precious metals that could be used for monatomic sciences. And they require a variety of scarce resources to power ships by anti-gravity, element 115 and water. Bob Lazar commented on that. What kind of conclusions can we draw about these different ET races? They have an ends justifies the means ethical orientation where suffering is acceptable to achieve a noble ends. Don't acknowledge a non-interference principle and use invasive procedures when interacting with humans. There's abundant testimonials by abductees supporting this thesis that invasive procedures are used. They have a neo-Darwinian view of survival where resource scarcity requires competition. If there's limited resources, there's going to be competition. No way around it. Not everyone can have all the resources. So, we get an idea of what a Type 0 extraterrestrial civilization would be like. Not all that different to us, maybe a little more technologically evolved, but in terms of their ethical and behavioural characteristics, they're not that different to us. We know all about resource exploitation and competition, and because that's what we're like. So it's not surprising that there would be some ETs that would be similar to us. Well, not all ETs are like that. In fact, I believe that the majority of ETs are very, very different to that, but that only a minority are at that kind of Type 0 civilization status. Type 1 civilizations use energy at a planetary level. They use forces such as oceans, geothermal activity, the energy grid, and other macro sources. UFO witnessed entering into volcanoes to influence eruptions. So, for example, in 2000, you had one UFO going into Mount Popocatépetl, and that quieted that eruption and protected the nearby city, Mexico City. Captain Bruce Cathy, a New Zealand airline pilot, he mapped or correlated UFO sightings to the planetary grid that he had developed based on different harmonics, based on the Earth's size and the speed of light and so forth. and he inferred that they use it as a power source. So the UFOs often show up at these critical points, and they are observed there, and he thinks that they're tapping into the grid, into the planetary energy grid. And that would be quite a vindication of what Nikola Tesla was talking about back in the early 1900s, where he talked about an energy grid that could be used for generating wireless energy or wireless electricity that could be transferred around the planet. Clearly, if you have an energy grid, you could move energy, vast quantities of energies from place to place, and it could be, you know, almost like storehouses of energy in the air. So what do Type 1 ETs use to power anti-gravity technology that can travel interstellar distances in a vacuum? Just to give you an idea, I mean, from one end to the other, in terms of the Milky Way galaxy, it's 100,000 light years. The Earth is about 35,000 light years from the galactic core, so it would take a long time to get from one side of the galaxy to the other using the kind of limited resources that we've seen for Type 0 civilizations. I think what we could guess that many of these Type 1 civilizations are using is zero-point energy. That zero-point energy is based on extracting energy from the quantum flux that exists in a vacuum. The vacuum is obviously something which is airless, and it's at a very low temperature, like the vacuum of space, but yet something can be extracted from that to fuel your energy needs in travelling through the vast distances of space. In terms of the quantum flux and zero-point energy, one way of understanding it is that the conventional kind of science that we're taught in high school or university is that you have here a nucleus of an atom with protons and neutrons, and then you have an electron kind of circling around it, or many electrons circling around the nucleus, and that the space in between is empty. Well, the zero-point energy theory is suggesting that this space, rather than being empty, is actually filled with the quantum flux. In other words, energy just spontaneously appearing and disappearing. And if you could tap into that vast energy, you would have something that would be even more powerful than Einstein's theory linking energy with mass, which was used for atomic fusion and atomic fission in terms of splitting the atom. That's something between the atoms, that there's energy, that the energy here between the nucleus and the electron, the energy in there is more or greater than what you get by splitting that or fusing that, which is a radical thought. This was experimentally predicted by, in 1948, and the Casimir effect actually confirmed this. It was confirmed in 1958 and 1997 in terms of this quantum flux exhibiting itself when you have two plates coming very close together, that the quantum flux that's being generated kind of randomly in all space, it would be affected by the proximity of these plates, and that would mean that you would have more quantum flux out here than you would have out here, and so you would actually have the two plates being squeezed together. So that's an example of zero-point energy. How much energy is there? There are estimates that zero-point energy, you can get anywhere from 10 to the power of 54 to 10 to the power of 94 ergs per cubic centimetre, which some descriptions are that if you think of all of the power being generated at any moment in the entire known visible universe, that would still not be as much as you would get from the zero-point energy emerging from 1 cubic centimetre. So it's vast. Any extraterrestrials that could power or could tap into that zero-point energy would have sufficient energy to power their vehicles, and their vehicles could be enormous. So they could power huge motherships capable of travelling interstellar space. And so here you have an example of some of the very large motherships that depicted there. And this was captured on video or on film by George Adamski back in the 1950s. And here you have a mothership and here you have scout craft emerging from the mothership. So he had captured that back in the 50s on his camera. Adamski says he met with an ET Orthon whose vehicle emerged from the mothership. So this is an example of the ET that Adamski here met. That's Orthon, and that's the scout craft. And that scout craft came from a mothership. And so this gives us an idea of exactly what it is that powers this mothership. This mothership can be powered by, say, zero-point energy to travel vast interstellar distances, whereas the scout craft are used for more local travelling, you know, within planets or within the kind of subspace orbits of planets. Adamski's book, Inside the Flying Saucers, described his interaction with Orthon and human-looking ETs living among us. So he described that there were extraterrestrials who look like us. Now remember at the very beginning I talked about the NATO classified document, the assessment, where it described 4 different extraterrestrial civilizations. As Paola Harris mentioned, a lot of the literature that you look at today, or in the modern era, is just dominated by these images of the greys, or some of the fewer images of reptilians. You rarely get images of human-looking ETs that look very beautiful, and that they are very striking and look very much like us. So this is something that is not well known, and I think it's been suppressed for various reasons, which is why contactees like Alex Collier, who's had these extensive experiences with human-looking ETs, have such a difficult time, you know. Whereas those who have invasive experiences, Whitley Strieber, I mean, he can go out there and publish as many horror stories as he likes, because no one in the secret government is going to say, stop that guy, he's going to provoke a revolution among the American people who want to be taken up for anal probes. No. It's not going to work. No. Let him publish, give him. But those talking about human-looking ETs that have a much more positive message, those are the ones you don't want getting the big book contractors or publishers writing about, and you want to make sure that their messengers have a hard time. Adamski reveals the spiritual teachings of the ETs, which is based on universal principles of abundance, love, and giving. Why is that? Why would they be based on these principles of abundance, love, and giving? Well, it's not too surprising when you look at their energy use. If you can use zero-point energy, which generates as much energy as you like from 1 cubic centimetre, as equivalent to all that's used in the known universe at any one moment, then you would have abundant energy. You would have so much energy, you could give it away, and you would still have more to power these huge ships, to build huge ships, to establish colonies on different worlds. You could help struggling civilizations meet their energy needs. You would have this abundance, and so energy abundance leads to a kind of philosophical abundance. Because you have unlimited energy, your philosophy changes. Philosophy and energy are related. I mean, Karl Marx did have it right that the kind of socio-economic conditions of a society influence consciousness. Others say, well, consciousness influences socio-economic conditions. But nevertheless, they're related. So if you have abundant energy, your socio-economic conditions are going to be abundance-based. And that means that your philosophy will be abundance-based. Other contactees have met with human-looking ETs with a spiritual message based on similar ideas of abundance. Valiant Thor and Friends, Swell, Maurizio Cavallo's story that Paola described earlier this morning. What are the conclusions we can draw about Type 1 ETs? They prioritise spiritual evolution over technological development. Again and again, the contactees from the 1950s, they were saying that they were being told this: our society had developed technology far beyond our spiritual abilities, and that we needed to catch up, we needed to balance, you know, that whole kind of triple Libra thing of balance. Angelica was saying, actually I'm a double Libra and an Aquarius, so, but 3 air signs, so it's pretty close. But you need to find the balance, that's important. And our society, or our military, weren't interested in balance, they were interested in bigger and better bombers and weapon systems, and that's really what they want. So they weren't interested in this message. They avoid, these Type 1 ET civilizations avoid agreements with shadow governments interested in advanced weaponry. They're pretty smart. I mean, they travel around the galaxy. I mean, they're going to come here and they're going to be hoodwinked by some 4-star generals and, you know, corporate chairmen, and, you know, into giving their advanced technology so these guys could mass produce it and kind of not give it to anyone else in the population and just extend their control over different parts of the planet. They wouldn't do that. So they don't directly interact with governments, but they directly interact with private citizens. Alex Collier, Luis Fernando, Victoria Lillenquist. We have some examples, Maurizio Cavallo that Paola described, examples of this contact happening all the time with human-looking extraterrestrials interacting with humanity. They tap into the planetary energy grid or standing electrical waves around the planet. They use the zero-point energy field, and they use the above unlimited energy resources to power their anti-gravity technologies, in contrast to the limited sources used by Type 0 civilizations. These guys use zero-point energy for powering their anti-gravity vehicles, whereas the Greys, which is what Bob Lazar said created the ships that he was exposed to, they used element 115. Well, element 115 is used to generate kind of antimatter, which then is used to propel their vehicles. But nevertheless, element 115 is a limited resource. So there are differences in the way that energy is consumed here. And the spirituality and ethics of these Type 1 civilizations, they recognise human free will and the principle of non-interference. They act to preserve Earth's environment and species diversity. And energy abundance encourages galactic philanthropy, cosmic unity, and law of attraction. They understand that as you give, you get back. They understand the law of attraction. Now imagine a whole society based on the law of attraction, and you go to the 1950s and you have meetings with these guys from the Pentagon, and you tell them, well, if you give to others, or you give to your enemies, they're not going to come for you. You give, and then you will create a peaceful society, and that's your best defense. To give is your best defense. Well, I think you know what the generals would have said to that. Type 2 civilizations. Well, there's evidence that there are civilizations that use energy at a stellar level. And here we have an example of just how vast this energy is. You have the Earth here, that's the approximate size of the Earth, and here you have a coronal mass ejection from the Sun. And this is vast compared to the size of the Earth. And there's evidence that there are ET civilizations that can move and even ignite stars. Type 2 civilizations can deal with great solar activity, including supernova and the solar wind. So here we have an example of the solar wind that's being generated all the time from the Sun, that the Sun is putting out these coronal mass ejections. Plasma is constantly being emitted by the Sun, and that makes up the solar wind, and that's bombarding our solar system, bombarding our planet. But certain civilizations have learned how to deal with that. They know how to deal with this kind of vast energy that's being generated. There are pictures of these civilizations that have their craft go into the Sun or in the proximity of the Sun. And we have evidence of that in the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, SOHO, which is stationed between the Earth and the Sun at a particular point where it isn't drawn by the gravity of the Sun or the Earth, so it's stationary at that point. And you have UFOs on NASA camera. You have the SOHO camera taking pictures of the Sun, and then you have these objects that look very much like UFOs. And this has been commented on various newspapers. The internet is many pictures of these images of UFOs in the vicinity of the Sun. So obviously these vehicles, they are able to handle the stellar energy. They're so close to the Sun, and they're able to control that energy in some way. This is not something that hasn't been considered by scientists. Professor Freeman Dyson, he argues that an advanced civilization one day can build a sphere 3 miles thick that can be constructed around the sun to harness its energies. And the principle is not all that odd to us. I mean, we build dams to harness the energy of rivers because we know if we just leave the rivers to flow in their natural process, that sometimes you can have floods and that can be devastating for certain areas. But if you build a dam, you can regulate that energy and use it in ways that can actually enhance your civilization rather than lead to destruction. Why wouldn't advanced ETs do exactly the same thing with the sun? And they would build something like this Dyson sphere around the sun, which would be exactly like a dam. You let in as much or more of the plasma, the solar wind and all the plasma flowing out as you want in a way that you can control, and which is going to enhance civilizations in that solar system as opposed to being a destructive force. Type 2 civilizations harness sufficient energy for exotic transportation systems such as traversable wormholes. Wormholes are based on the idea of a singularity point which enables shortcuts through a space-time. So you've all, I'm sure, seen that example where you have a piece of paper, and if you have 2 dots at different ends of that piece of paper, if you draw a line between them, that kind of represents the linear distance. But if you fold that sheet of paper, then the 2 points come together. So, and that distance, obviously, to go from point A to point B is now going to be much, much shorter, almost instantaneous. So similarly, some extraterrestrials know how to bend space-time by creating these wormholes so that you can travel from one part of the galaxy to the other. These singularity points are created by collapsing stars that generate large gravitational fields that warp space-time. Einstein's general theory of relativity tells us that time dilates to infinity at a singularity point. So as gravity gets stronger and stronger, denser and denser, time dilates. So, for example, if you have a star collapsing, then the time, if anyone was living on that star, the passage of time for them would be much less than those that are further away. New scientific theory suggests that singularity points are far more common and may be found in all atoms. So Nassim Haramein, who was here last year and spoke, and Dr. Rauscher was here and spoke yesterday. This singularity point may actually be found in every atom. That's what Nassim is arguing. But nevertheless, singularity points can be far more common than we commonly understand. Wormholes require exotic matter and enormous energy to keep a singularity point open for travel. It's understood by the scientific community that if a traversable wormhole exists, it would consume energy, or to keep it open would require vast amounts of energy, far more than our present level of science could ever develop. Torsion field theory suggests that sufficient spin can be generated for accessing singularity points. So this is another theory that propulsion can be generated by spinning plasma rapidly around an object, and if you spin that rapidly enough, you're going to generate an anti-gravity effect, and you can actually generate a warping of space-time. So then you've got the Star Trek and the Enterprise going into warp speed. So this is an idea that was introduced to us through science fiction. Planetoids, there's even evidence that extraterrestrials that are operating at this type 2 level have the technology to be able to hollow out moons, to be able to construct an artificial structure out of a moon. So, for example, Saturn's moon Iapetus was claimed by Richard Hoagland to be an ancient ET artifact with a 1,300 kilometre long and 20 kilometre high equatorial ridge. So this is Iapetus, one of the moons of Saturn, and here is the equatorial ridge, which is 20 kilometres high, stretching 1,300 kilometres around Iapetus. It looks artificial. According to Hoagland, he did his geometric analysis of it, the imagery, and he does image analysis, and he found that it is actually a geodesic. In other words, Iapetus is an artificial construction. And here's a geodesic. Type 2 civilizations harness sufficient energy to construct artificial planetoids. Was Iapetus something like, well, we know it as the Death Star, but it didn't have to be a Death Star that could destroy planets. It could be used as a planetoid. And here with Iapetus, there are some striking similarities here between them, and Hoagland is kind of pointing to this similarity here as being very intriguing. According to what I've been told by Alex, according to the Andromedans, they say that at a certain level of technological sophistication, extraterrestrial civilizations begin to hollow out moons. They begin to hollow them out to construct these planetoids. And then, once their technology progresses even more, they can build their own planetoids without using moons. They don't have to use a moon, a natural substance, that they can create it organically, a planetoid organically. And so then they leave these older planetoids behind. So this is kind of like, you know, the discard. A discarded planetoid by some ET civilization that's been left in orbit around Saturn. Some examples of Type 2 civilizations. Well, according to Drunvalo Melchizedek, back in 1972, extraterrestrials from Sirius created an energy shield around the Earth to protect us from solar activity. He argued that there was going to be the sun, our sun would go nova for a limited period of time. Suns go nova for a few years sometimes. In other words, they expand out and generate this enormous energy field where so much energy is being created that any planets in the nearby vicinity would be destroyed or would be just bombarded by solar activity, and all life on the surface would be destroyed. Drunvalo Melchizedek said that the Sirians actually created this artificial structure to protect the planet in 1972 because the Sirians thought that humanity deserved another chance. The Sirius ETs, well, those from Sirius, these are some representations of them. You can see the elongated skull, often described in Egyptian art, the cat-like beings, so again, association with the felines, that somehow the Sirian connection with Egypt is very significant. So we've had some connection with them in our past. The Andromedans, this is the best picture I could get on the Andromedans. Here you have an Andromedan male, the light blue skin, and an Andromedan female. This is something that has been depicted. And these extraterrestrials from Andromeda, what are some of the things that they do? Alex didn't get into it too much, but the Andromedans are specialists in creating planetary councils or stellar councils that help represent systems that are still evolving, so that you can develop a galactic citizenship. So this was something that the Andromedans specialize in, that they are very adept at helping civilizations like ours become members of these galactic councils. And one of the things that the Andromedans specialized in was establishing the Andromeda Council, whereby different civilizations would cooperate in dealing with developing worlds like ours. And that one day, our destiny would be, if we kind of hung in there and made it through, that we would be able to join councils like the Andromeda Council. So some of the conclusions: Type 2 civilizations form galactic councils whereby planetary representatives can discuss a planet's interests. They support multilateral institutions like the United Nations taking responsibility on ET issues. And so for a moment here, I'll kind of just mention that back, I don't remember the month, but it was sometime kind of in the middle of last year, I had a conversation with Alex, and he said that the United Nations was going to be discussing, or was discussing, extraterrestrial life and what to do, and that I should make contact with them or find out what they're doing and seek some way of being able to interact with that. Well, as it turned out, that was vindicated, because we found out that in February 12, 13, 14, secret meetings were held in the United Nations to discuss extraterrestrial life. The major nations were discussing what to do. UFO reports were coming in from all around the world, and governments were wanting to know, what do we do? Do we just keep on, you know, telling people it's kind of swamp gas or what? They wanted direction from the United States and other major nations. At these secret meetings at the UN, there was agreement that there would be a shift in policy, and that's very important. A very significant shift in policy has occurred, and you're not going to read about it in the newspapers. It's something that you have to kind of infer once you look at exactly what's happening with these meetings and what's been developing afterwards. But what has happened is that there's been a shift in policy from the debunking practices that have existed since the 1950s right up until the present moment, and now the United Nations is supporting. There was agreement at the United Nations for a new policy which will be based on openness. Now, openness is different to disclosure. They're different. Disclosure, you're telling people the truth. Openness means, well, you know, that could be true, or it could be just a big lie. You know, you're just open to the possibilities. But nevertheless, it's a shift, an important shift, because it means that the scientific community can now explore these issues in a way which isn't going to lead to professionals losing their jobs, because it does happen. Professionals do lose their jobs. I mean, that's something that Angelica mentioned, that I certainly went through that, because it's fun being a professor with a salary and office and graduate assistants and teaching to captive audiences your latest analysis of things, and it would have been great teaching this stuff. I would have loved to be able to do it and get paid a salary, but they made it very clear to me that this kind of material didn't belong in the university, and they just showed me the door. But with this new policy of openness, it means that scholars aren't going to be deterred from doing this kind of research, that they're going to be actually encouraged, because there's so much data, and it's like, well, we don't know what's going on. That'll be the official position. Explain this. Kind of like what the Mexican Air Force did back in 2005, I think. They had some sightings of UFOs that was captured on film by the Mexican Air Force, and they actually gave it to Mexico's leading UFO researcher and said, well, what is this? You tell us. Jaime Maussan was the one who was given that film by the Mexican Air Force, and he conducted analysis, but it showed you a policy that the Mexicans had of openness. Well, now we are entering into a new phase where governments like the United States, Britain, France, other major nations will actually be developing this policy of openness, which is why you're having governments of France, Britain releasing all their UFO files. The latest was Britain. Just last week they released their UFO files. They're now available on the British National Archives. You can go online and you can get Britain's UFO files. The French made them available last year. So in other words, we can see that major nations are making available their UFO files, putting it out there for people to figure it out, for scholars to figure it out. In other words, this is, to me, a sure sign that we have entered into this policy of openness. And if you want final proof, it's what happened last week. Paola and I actually were on Coast to Coast Radio last week discussing the recent announcement by the Vatican. The Vatican's chief astronomer in Rome announced that extraterrestrials are our brothers, right? Extraterrestrials are our brothers, which is a very important policy shift by the Vatican. Previously, the Vatican policy on extraterrestrial life, I think, dated from Giordano Bruno, right? You know, anyone talking about extraterrestrial life, and you get burned at the stake. Well, you know, that didn't happen recently, but there was a Catholic theologian, Corrado Balducci, that Paola has interviewed and hosted and brought to the United States on a number of occasions, and he actually suggested that, implied that Vatican policy was that extraterrestrials are our brothers because they are born without original sin. They're less evolved than the angels, but they are more evolved than man, which is a very important theological statement. And the reason is, it means that only on earth could the Christ have been born. Only on earth. Because if the extraterrestrial civilizations are born without original sin, it means that Christ could not be born there. So Christ was born on earth because we suffered original sin, which makes us unique in the universe. And that means that the Vatican has a mission. The Vatican sees the potential here of universal proselytization. Send the Jesuits to the Pleiades. Send the Jesuits to Sirius, and you will convert them to the Christian message, to the Christian gospel, because they do not know Christ. Very clever. Now, what you had here was with this chief Vatican astronomer. He made this not just an implicit belief by the Vatican. He made it very clear that this was officially accepted by the Vatican. He had the go-ahead by Pope Benedict. It wasn't informal like with Corrado Balducci. This was the chief Vatican astronomer, the director of that astronomy, of that observatory there in Rome, had with the full collusion of the Vatican Church. In other words, the Vatican is part of this new policy of openness. The Vatican has a lot to gain. You think about it, really a lot of bad PR they've gotten over the years, you know, apologising 400 years later for Copernicus being, you know, excommunicated and Galileo being imprisoned, you know, apologising 400 years after all of these things. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. And then all the scandals. Well, how do you look good as an institution? Well, this new mission of the Catholic Church being part of giving the truth to the global population and preparing humanity for a new mission, converting the galaxy to Christianity. That's where we're going. Well, that's where they want to take us if we let them. So anyway, that's a bit of insight there into what's happening at the United Nations. Now, at an official level, a lot is happening. At a private level, though, a lot is happening as well. And I think that these Type 2 civilizations are working with private citizens in creating councils. And we've been discussing or alluding to these ideas of councils where private citizens come together and they can change their world by using creative visualization and positive intent. We know it through our meetings. We've had meetings here on the Big Island. We have a number of them, actually, creation councils, if you call them that. Joan Ocean has been holding them regularly for 4 years up at her ranch. We've been hosting also a similar council at our home, hosting that, and Jaleka and I. Shalea is also, and Zandriel, they've been hosting Creation Council at their premises. So this is something that's happening, and it's growing. It's an organic process. It really is a spontaneous process whereby small groups of individuals where they can actually establish communications and interactions with ETs are coming together to form these councils. Type 2 civilizations recognize human free will and the principle of non-interference. They act to protect the integrity of planetary systems. They promote the universal harmony of large systems as part of universal law. As above, so below. That's the holographic principle by David Bohm. And so this group of extraterrestrials really are in alignment with the sort of ideals that have been expressed here in this conference and that we've been exposed to through the different meditations. The science of these ETs, well, they can deal with unpredictable stellar energies in ways that assist developing planetary systems. They're able to utilize traversable wormholes for extensive galactic travel to acquire information. And longevity and health, they're superior to Type 1 civilizations who regard Type 2s as master teachers and builders. Alex talked about the lifespan of the Andromedans. Visayas lived to 4,000 years old, which is an extraordinary age. Type 1 civilizations, those from Venus, they can live for 1,000, 1,500 years. Type 0 civilizations, their lifespans would be less. So with that, I now want to move to the type 3 civilizations, the ones that would use energy at a galactic level. These are the ones that really are very important for us, because I think there is a connection that we have with them. Their energy use is based on galactic forces such as the galactic core, black holes and galactic superwaves. So here's our galaxy and there's the galactic core. They can move or engineer entire solar systems and create stellar navigation beacons. They can create a navigation system for the galaxy. Well, that's not going to be surprising. I mean, you think about it. You go to anywhere you drive your car, you need to have some way of navigating around. You need a GPS or maps or something. Well, you would need the same thing if you're traveling the galaxy. How do you do it? Well, how would you develop a galactic navigation system? Well, you do it by creating these things called pulsars. Dr. Paul Laviolette argues that the pulsars are artificial radio beacons that act as a galactic navigation system. There's only 1,500 pulsars in our Milky Way galaxy, and each one emits a particular frequency which is constant. In other words, by knowing the different vibrational frequencies and emissions of these pulsars and getting an idea of where they are or in relationship to one another, you can create a galactic navigation system. And this is something that NASA knows, and NASA depicted that on the Voyager plaque that was sent out there for extraterrestrials that found this Voyager satellite, that they could quickly find where it came from. And the way they did it was you had this image here of a distinct number of pulsars. I mean, what would there be, about 16 of them? 16 pulsars at varying distances, and you can see the different kind of lines in there, the squiggly lines. That is a code that tells you the frequency of that pulsar emission. That pulsar emission, that way you can position yourself in relation to all these pulsars in any particular in the galaxy. And so once extraterrestrials see this map of pulsars, then they can identify where our solar system is, and then they can see that we're the third planet out. So the pulsars in our Milky Way galaxy actually act as a navigation system. According to Paul Laviolette, pulsars were created by ETs as a warning of periodic superwaves from the galactic core. So he was arguing that not only do these pulsars act as a GPS system, but that those that created the pulsars and positioned them in different parts also encoded within them a warning about galactic superwaves. In other words, just as our sun generates every 11 years, it goes through these cycles of massive coronal mass ejections, so too the galaxy goes through a periodic upsurge or surge in galactic emissions, and that can be destabilizing for the galaxy. Superwaves of energy generated in the galactic core approximately every 13,000 years, which is pretty analogous to the solar 11-year cycles that we have. 2012 is hypothesized to be when the next galactic superwave hits. So according to Paul Laviolette, he's suggesting that 2012 is when we are due for the next galactic superwave to come here. And that the Mayans knew this and they developed their calendar accordingly. That the Mayans were tipped off that this time in our history would be a very important time because it would correspond to an era where these galactic superwaves are occurring. ETs are involved in this. Firstly, by telling the Mayans, many thousands of years ago, how would the Mayans have known about the galactic superwaves? Well, like the Sumerians and their encounters with the gods, or the Anunnaki, so too the Mayans had their encounters with the gods. And they were told about astronomical principles, and so they developed their theories of the calendar, and the fact that it ends in 2012 signifies that this is a very important historical juncture, and that ETs had a role in letting us know about that. And so there you see some crop circles with what looks like various forms of the Mayan calendar. According to Alex's Andromedans, natural traversable wormholes found around the galaxy were built by a highly advanced group of extraterrestrials called the Patal, or the Guardians, as he said. Someone built this incredible infrastructure throughout the galaxy, the pulsar network, the wormholes that are used as these kind of galactic superhighways. Someone built it. According to Alex's Andromedans, that group of extraterrestrials were known as the Patal, but they exist in legend. They're ancient. They are not well known even to ETs that we would consider to be incredibly advanced. The Type 3 civilizations may be related to the Patal, that the Andromedans claim orchestrated the evolution of intelligent life in the galaxy. Let me just mention very briefly that references to the Type 3 civilizations are often done in terms of the legend. Barbara Messiniak always talked about the legends of the ETs and what they were doing here, and that the legends were being created. And of course Alex talked about the Patal and how the Andromedans and many other civilizations viewed them with great reverence. Well, I think what probably happened was that the Patal, or the Type 3 civilizations that we're talking about, that built this incredible galactic infrastructure that is part of the GPS system used by less evolved extraterrestrial civilizations, that the Patal at some point in their evolution simply evolved out of the physical or 3D dimension into a higher dimension, or evolved into a form of pure consciousness. So what are some of the politics of the Type 3 civilizations? They promote self-governance to deal with galactic superwave cycles. In other words, the reason that Paul La Violette argued that the galactic superwaves were of great concern to the Type 3 civilizations was that they knew that developing civilizations like ours, if we weren't warned, if we hadn't taken correct preparations, when we experience a galactic superwave, we could have great trouble because our sun could go nova, for example. In other words, so imagine if our sun went nova or exhibited coronal mass ejections and solar activity far more drastic than anything we've ever experienced that could really affect life on the surface of this planet. And so the Type 3 civilizations had kind of built a warning system to help us evolve out of that. They leave galactic clues and legends. Astrology is even part of this, to promote species evolution and to survive planetary and stellar crises. Their location and activities are largely unknown, as I've mentioned. They assist evolution of civilizations by building galactic pulsar networks and traversable wormholes. They view all life as interconnected and assist civilizations to develop a spirit of cooperation with one another. They're all about encouraging us to cooperate, which is why these galactic signals have been placed in the form of these pulsars around the galaxy that are placed strategically near the burnt-out cores of stars that went supernova at a certain point. And so it's like there's a warning there. It's like, be careful. There's something here for you to understand. So they are certainly wanting us to cooperate, because this is something that doesn't just affect one civilization and not another. It affects everyone in a particular solar system if these galactic superwaves are as significant as Violette suggests. Some of their science super technologies to manufacture a network of pulsars around the galaxy, which serves as a galactic beacon for millennia. created traversable wormholes that are used as galactic superhighways by many civilizations, and they've largely developed beyond technology into pure consciousness, which I mentioned. And it's interesting that we have a lot of literature that's emerging now. For example, Greg Braden talking about the divine matrix, that the universe will respond to our thoughts. So the more we concentrate our thoughts and we become focused, the universe will respond to that. So we are learning about that now. Imagine a highly evolved super race of extraterrestrials who understood this. At a certain point, they might feel that, well, there's no point in having a physical body anymore because it's all about consciousness and it's all about what you can hold in your consciousness, and you create that. Maybe they chose to incarnate. Maybe they chose to do what Alex was alluding to in terms of what the Andromedans were telling him, that the Patal may have incarnated into this human realm because we are unique, that this planet is unique, that there's something different about planet Earth that makes it something unique in all the galaxy. So maybe in a sense what the Catholic Church is planning to do in another few years, maybe there's a truth there which they're distorting for their agenda and which we are going to kind of shift for our agenda. So there are different types of ETs interacting with humanity. Governments are providing warnings of what lies ahead. Some ET civilizations have similar energy needs to humanity and may be resource predators, as evidenced by the covert agreements with governmental entities. Talked about that earlier. More advanced ET civilizations, type 1 to 3, I think they're the majority. These are the ones that you would have most contact with if we become open to extraterrestrial contact. They have higher spiritual ethical values and assist humanity in its development and challenges. 2012 is a major transformative event where individuals integrate spiritual principles. 2012 is a challenge so that we can mature into a galactic society where we can express our sovereignty as a race, as a civilization, rather than it being a catastrophe, which is what some of the other ETs are suggesting. Type 0 extraterrestrials focus on and promote catastrophism to take advantage of uncertainty over 2012 to promote their goals. Barbara Han-Clow wrote a book called Catastrophobia. Very good book. It shows how very easily humanity can be manipulated or is kind of filled with this kind of historic racial memory of catastrophes. And I think there are certain ET groups that come along and look at this and come along and look at us and say, look at that bunch, they are obsessed with catastrophes. So let's just lead them down the track of manifesting catastrophe. Because they understand that really it's through the power of consciousness that we manifest. So they understand that if we can be manipulated or tricked into manifesting through our consciousness a catastrophe, self-fulfilling. We've created it. We take responsibility. It's not them. So that's what I think some of these type 0 ETs are doing, which is why they work through certain channels to actually put out these doom and gloom messages. That 2012 is all about catastrophe. 95% will be wiped out and the ETs will come along, and the other 5% who believed in the message, believed in Nancy, that they will be lifted off on the Zeta ships, and then when everything calms down they'll be brought back and establish a beautiful hybrid society where we can be genetically modified to express the sort of values that that kind of group of ETs desire. Well, you know, that's kind of a caricature of what's happening. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify, but I think there's a lot of that does have some validity. Governments are easy to manipulate because their focus is on the worst case scenario. Every military around the world will produce, like every 10 years, a white paper, and that white paper basically talks about black things or very dark things. Talks about the threat, the national security threat, possible national security threats. What do we have to do to prepare for this particular national security contingency. So they will think up every possible national security threat and then take preparations for that. Well, we know from universal law and the kind of studies we've done, well, if you're preparing for the worst, you're going to manifest that. If you're putting your energy into that, you're going to manifest exactly what you're hoping to avoid. And so the idea that the military has is prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Well, if you prepare for the worst, put your energy and resources to preparing for the worst, you're going to manifest the worst. Forget about hoping for the best. But that's what they think. And that's why they got all these deep underground bases that they're going to scuttle to when 2012 comes, and they think everything's going to collapse. However, there is, I think, another trend that is happening here, and that concerns private citizens. Private citizens tend to focus on positive outcomes. We prepare for the best while being mindful of the worst. We have a different philosophy. We're not going to prepare for the worst. We're going to be preparing for the best. We think the best. We put our energies into the best. We manifest these positive outcomes. And that's what we've been doing in this conference. Many of the speakers and the meditations in the mornings and the meditations in the evenings by Angelica and David and Shalia in the mornings, we were being led through this process, and we even did it together a few times, of thinking the best, envisaging the best possible outcome, what kind of world we want. And we put our energy into it. And when a group like this comes together and focus your energies, when we focus our energies on the best possible scenario, we create a very powerful energy wave. And that means that any ET group that is in alignment with the energy that we are putting in, bring in their assistance, which is why so many talk about these powerful columns of light come down. Victoria Lillenquist had that beautiful photo of a column of light coming down that she was able to photograph. Well, that's exactly what's happening, because if you have focused thoughts, you're able to attract that kind of power. And that's what we've been doing. Positive intention is explained by a number of researchers. Greg Braden, in The Divine Matrix, Lynn McTaggart, The Intention Experiment, Richard Bartlett, Matrix Energetics, all of these books talk about positive intention. And so if people start to practice this in groups like we've been doing during this conference, and then we will be able to really manifest the world that we are all dreaming of, rather than the catastrophe that some are having nightmares over. So there's a paradigm shift here from logical analysis, which is zero-sum thinking, to positive intention, creative visualization, flexible sum thinking. There's a paradigm shift here. We need to take greater individual responsibility for the governance of the planet regarding extraterrestrial life, and not leave it up to governments. Governments, their mindset is very, very different. In fact, governments do not exercise the kind of governance that's necessary for this time with 2012 and the energies that are coming. They're just not suited to it. They think in terms of worst case scenarios. They prepare for these horrific contingencies and put their resources into that, and they give zilch to those that are doing the creative visualization, positive intention work. They do zilch. So in other words, governments do not govern for a time like that which we are now experiencing. So it's citizens like us that have to exercise governance on behalf of the rest of humanity who just don't have a clue. They just don't have a clue. And that's the sad fact, but it is that minority of people that come to conferences like this, that bother to watch videos like this, that bother to read the books that we've been citing in this conference, they are the ones that are going to take action. They are the ones, and you are the ones, we are the ones that are actually going to exercise governance for the time that we are entering into. So we need to create citizen contact councils where private citizens use positive intention to prepare for communications, interactions with extraterrestrials, and create conditions for Earth transformation. We need to create these citizen contact councils throughout every region of the planet. We've been given examples through this conference. We've been given exercises. It's something that needs to happen. There are examples here that I've mentioned on the Big Island. And what I've done with and I've been collaborating with a number of other groups and individuals who have come to earlier conferences, we have been putting our heads together to come up with a declaration that would be ready for this conference, and we did. We've come up with it, and we actually have a number of hard copies, which if you like to distribute those hard copies I made there to the audience. Thank you, Kathy. Kathy's going to distribute those. I'm going to read it out while it's being distributed. We are an association of citizen organisations and private citizens dedicated to research, public education and political activism with regard to extraterrestrial life. We are convinced that citizen groups can network together in the use of positive intention and telepathic communications to achieve citizen governance and contact with extraterrestrial life. We consequently issue the following declaration. We recognise the reality of extraterrestrial life and the existence of advanced technologies, scientific principles and universal knowledge extraterrestrials offer. We affirm that the diffusion of this knowledge and technology can significantly improve the human condition. We declare our support for the establishment of citizen contact councils that will share the following goals: disclosing the reality of extraterrestrial life and exposing government policies that were secretly implemented, sharing the knowledge and technology provided by extraterrestrials for the benefit of humanity and the biosphere, representing the interests of humanity and biosphere in communications and interactions with extraterrestrials, promoting open contact with extraterrestrial civilizations and transforming Earth into a galactic society where human sovereignty is respected. We declare our support for citizen contact councils using the following 5 principles in their operations: using positive intention to transform the human condition, establishing telepathic communications with extraterrestrial civilizations, building positive relationships with advanced ethical extraterrestrial civilizations, cooperating with advanced extraterrestrial civilizations, achieving common goals, using consensus and empathic communications to promote group cohesion and cooperation. We subsequently support the formation of citizen contact councils around the world where existing councils on the Big Island of Hawaii and elsewhere provide examples for the above goals and principles. We, the undersigned, do pledge to support the creation of citizen contact councils to achieve its above stated chief purpose. We call upon members of the public to show their support by distributing and or signing this declaration. And here you have a list of the organisations that collaborated in putting together this document. And an online petition has been created, and you can begin adding your name and support for that now. Well, let me wrap it up. I'm over time, so let me say that the Earth Transformation Conference brings inventors, scientists, spiritual teachers and extraterrestrial contactees, researchers annually to Hawaii and other locations, and this is certainly something that's not going to end with this conference. And this conference we feel has been the most successful so far in terms of the quality of the people that have come and the presentations that we have heard. Just stunning presentations. Everyone was just magnificent, and so that I think is a reflection of where we are as a group and as a society in terms of absorbing this information. So we're going to continue with this. We did a conference in Japan, and we think that this is something that's going to continue to occur in other countries, that this Earth Transformation project is very much going to be supported around the world. And here's some of the people that attended the first Earth Transformation tour in 2007 in Japan: Alex Collier, Angelica, myself, Hector Palacios and Wendell Stevens. Solutions. Wish I could spell solutions correctly. It's important to spell solutions correctly. Well, anyway, solutions. Courses. We can do courses in the formal education so that we understand ET civilizations and exopolitics. And those are some of the, that's the banner for the Exopolitics Certification Program. Here's an organisation that was created for doing this kind of research and sponsoring this kind of teaching and outreach. You can get information of both of those with the two brochures that are available on the desk back where Paola is, on the Exopolitics Institute. Brochures are there. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and there's more to come.